Okay, today is November the 12th, 2007. My name's Tanya Finchum. I'm a librarian with the OSU Library, and we're working on a project called Women of the Oklahoma Legislature, and we're at the OSU Tulsa campus. And today we're talking with Maxine Horner, who was in the Senate, was elected in '86 and turned out in 2004.
Right.
Is that correct? Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure to be here.
And we'll start by having you tell a little bit about your childhood, where you were born, and then we'll move into the future.
Okay, well, I am a native Tulsan, born here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I attended elementary school, which was Dunbar Elementary School at the time, no longer exists. And then the Carver, it was known as Carver Junior High School then, it's now Carver Middle School. And then graduated from Booker T. Washington class of 1951. And so we were the first class to graduate out of the new school then. They've done some current expansions now, but we were the first class to graduate in the new school when it moved to its site where it is now. And came from a musical family. My dad was the jazz and blues guy. My mom was classically trained. And so I began piano lessons because I loved music, always did, and it was surrounded by music always. So and I certainly liked my dad's side was the blues and the jazz, and more jazz than blues. But Mom was a stern one, and so she made you practice the lessons you were supposed to learn classically. And she was a singer, just probably before our time, but she, as the story was told to us, is that as a 16-year-old, she came from Muskogee, Oklahoma, and she was in a concert. At that time, it was called the Convention Hall, and now the Brady, which is the Brady Theater. But she had performed there with, I guess, from her high school, some production that they did there. And so from high school, I received a scholarship to attend Wiley College in Marshall, Texas. My dream was to go to Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri. And that came about because while I was in high school, I was quite involved in our journalism classes, and we worked on the newspaper, the yearbook. So I was one of the students that had an opportunity to go there for some journalism workshop, along with other students who went as well. And of course fell in love with that campus. But the fact that I did get a scholarship to Wiley, which did help financially the family, then of course no choice, go to Wiley in Marshall, Texas. And I remember getting on the train here and kind of scared, and first train ride on my way to Texas. And it's so kind of surreal for me now because here it is now, 56 years later, and now it's the Jazz Hall of Fame, of which I am the founder, and I can remember when I took my first train ride in that building. So that's just really exciting to me.
Full circle. Almost.
Yes.
Were you an only child?
No, have a sister and two brothers, and both. I'm the oldest, and my sister is next to me, and then of course the two guys are we call the brats of the family.
And when did you get interested in the political arena?
Well, actually, I was fortunate to work for Congressman Jim Jones. Went to work in his office, and I was absolutely fascinated with the work that we did here in his district office, and did have an opportunity to go to DC and see how his office and staff worked there in Washington. But the type of work that we did, it was as if you became the congressman. And he demanded that, really. It was whatever your constituents needed, he wanted to make sure that they were taken care of. And he would come, when he would make his visits to Tulsa, then he would always make sure that when he had town hall meetings, all the staff had to go. And then on the following morning, he would have all of these little different things that had come up during the meeting, concerns people were concerned about. He wanted those things answered, and he wanted to know where you were on it. And it was not a long delay. He wanted instant response to his constituents. And I think that was something that was so foreign to me, because I just did not ever know that politicians took that kind of concern, and maybe they all don't, but I know he did, and he was absolutely adamant about answering the phone. It shouldn't ring 3, 4, 5 times. You needed to answer that phone on the first ring, if at all possible. And I talked to my friends. I was excited about the kinds of things that we were doing, but I was excited about just being a part of the staff. I wasn't thinking about running for an office, but when the seat became open, then because I'd been bragging about this Congressman Jones and all the things that we did, I just didn't know people called and said, I didn't get my Social Security benefits, or I didn't get my IRS check, or veterans who had problems, and you delved into it and took care of those needs for people who had exhausted everything that they possibly could. And he made sure that his office would respond to his constituents that he was serving. And so one of my friends said, you should really, you've been talking about all the things that you do, you should run for that seat. And I said, oh no, not at all. I said, I just enjoy working in the office. I don't see myself out there as a candidate for an office. And I just kept telling him, no, I just don't think that's, I don't think that's my thing. And it was my daughter who gave me the push. She said, well, all the things you brag about doing in the name of the congressman, why don't you do it in your name? And that's how it all began.
And how old was she?
She was, at that time, she was in her early 20s. And so I looked at her and I said, well, we need to sit down as a family and talk about this, because some of the things that I see in here, candidates go through, every member in the family's got to have, real thick skins, because you're not going to like what they say about your mom. I become a whole different person in the eyes of other people. You know me as your mom, but other people are going to see me differently. And that's how it really all began. And of course, I was in a race with majority in the race. They were men, and there was one other female, and I think it was a total at the time, because it was an open seat. So I think in the primary there might have been 10 candidates at the time, and I think I was probably one of name recognition, least known. I had been involved in a lot of things, but always in a background, stuffing envelopes somewhere, working in a campaign, or, knocking on doors, or those kinds of things. But I had not been out there in some of the other people, particularly J. Homer Johnson, who had been director of Model Cities, and there were others who carried titles in community projects that they had been involved in. And the more someone would tell me, and I've always had a competitive streak, so I guess I will say that up front. But when someone said, oh, you can't win, you just can't, you just can't. And then you hear things that's not a place for a woman to be, you it's just not there, it's just not that for a woman. So I said, well, we'll see, because I'll work hard. And so I'll get out here. And the more I was told no, the more I pushed forward to win. And I went through a runoff, which was kind of scary because then, of course, the person that I most feared, I think, was J. Homer Johnson because he was quite well known and quite popular among, constituents in the district that we would have both been representing. And so I did come out of the runoff as the winner, and then I had a general. And then, of course, I was up against a very prominent name in our community. The father was the pastor of one of the largest churches in our community, Dr. Chappelle, and of course his son Carlos Chappelle, who's a judge now, and an outstanding young man. And so here we were, side by side, running together. But what I did have the utmost respect for him was that he had a lot of respect for me, and he said, we're going to conduct a clean campaign. You've been bruised pretty badly through the primary and the runoff. But I'm here to tell you that may the best person win, and we're going to run a clean campaign. And I said, well, that works for me because I'm not comfortable slinging mud anyway. And so that's how it all started. And that began my journey into the legislature in 1986 when I was elected and start serving in 1987.
Were you the first woman to hold the seat?
Actually shared Judge Miles LaGrange was in Oklahoma City, and so she and I would be the first African American females to serve in the Senate. We went in at the same time.
Were you the first one from your district?
I was the first African American female from Tulsa.
What was your campaign strategy then? What do you think gave you that cut in?
Well, I've always been a strong proponent of education, and that was the key thing for me in running for the seat, as well as focused on economic development. That whatever could be done through the legislative process was my platform for my area. But when I did actually get into the legislature, I was able to get, which is the greatest thing I think that has ever happened in our state, was that I was able to pass legislation that created the OOHRP bill, which gave all students statewide an opportunity to attend college with tuition free. And so that's known as the Oklahoma Higher Learning Access. I think it's now being called the Oklahoma Promise. But that started with me, and it was a struggle because there was no money in the very beginning. And so trying to convince some of the legislators, how are we going to fund this thing? And I don't know if that's a good idea. But the one thing that I would not give up, and we did not get it past the first year, but I was relentless in pursuing that avenue to make sure that our young people had that opportunity. And it went further than just college. It also included technical education too, because everyone isn't college bound. They may not all, but I also thought, but suppose you go to technical school and you get so excited about the field you've chosen to study that you would say, well, I might need some advanced curriculum here. I need some more to what I've obtained through my technical training. So I felt strongly about that bill, and I think that came from the fact that my parents just focused on education. They never did say, more or less, what are you going to major in? What are you going to do with it? But education, education, education. And the fact that I grew up in the time segregation, so we were in segregated schools. Universities in the state of Oklahoma were not accepting students from African Americans into their universities. So the only school that we had in the state of Oklahoma, if you were going to stay in Oklahoma, was Langston University. And so times have changed, and of course we've had great fighters who were responsible for bringing that to light and making that change. And so the fact that my mom always said, we cannot allow whatever to be a crutch. She said, I just won't allow it. I won't allow excuses. I'm not going to let you fall back on well, we can't do it because, the color of our skin, that type of thing. She said, it doesn't work. What has to happen is that you have to be a person who must run faster, go faster, learn faster, and do your best. That's all I can expect of you. But I will never allow you to make excuses for anything. If obstacles get in your way, you get rid of them and you pull yourself up and keep moving.
Was she present when the bill was signed then?
No, in fact, my mom actually did not live to see me go in the legislature. But I know that her strength and her words were always with me. In fact, I always said that sometimes in the legislature, particularly on bills that were controversial, maybe are a little hard to swallow for some of my colleagues to vote with me. And I would just think about my dad being on one shoulder saying all kinds of crazy stuff, and then my mom's words were there that was more the gentle side, that, you can still do this, and he's saying, let them know how you really feel. You could just hear that bounce back and forth. But I think a combination of the both of them, the strengths that I obtained from both of them, was very helpful being in the legislature.
Was that your first major piece?
No, actually, it was not. The very first bill that I became very supportive of was on a human rights issue, and we were dealing with hate crimes. And so that was actually my first piece of legislation that I was able to author. And here again, you can imagine all of the that's not necessary, that doesn't happen, and you heard all the excuses that this one. And in fact, the very first bill did not have the kind of teeth, because that's one thing you do learn too, is that, things can come and start watering down your bill, and it starts out one way, and it very well could, end up not having all the information. But my thought was, okay, well then this is step one. And then you can always come back and you start learning those things, that you can put a little bit more teeth in the bill, and then hopefully someone else will catch on and may take up that bill. I want to see more teeth put into the bill. What I did find is that when things seem to happen to individuals, then some of the things that you're trying to do your colleagues will become a little bit more supportive. Sometimes it's totally foreign to them because they live in a world that they feel that doesn't exist. And so I think sometimes it isn't until it happens to you, or maybe to some of your constituents, that you have a better understanding of that. I'm always reminded of Freddie Williams, who served in the House at the time when I first went in. She was already there. Freddie is deceased. But I remember Freddie's fight for breast cancer. And this was just bitter. I mean, it was almost to the point that it was, when you see things happening now, I always think about her because, we do stand on the shoulders of people who have been there before us because it was her plight and her fight, and she was relentless. No matter what was said on the floor, she'd say, "We're gonna get this done," and she did. And that is one of the things that you learn to. You don't just give up, particularly if you have a real passion for why this should happen.
So she was a role model?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. I loved Freddie as well as, and I think we had a connection because of her love for music and the arts. And of course, that was an area that was very dear to me, was being a strong advocate for the arts. And what I didn't say is that as a child growing up and playing the piano, that my dream is that I was going to be in New York City, probably in a club, playing piano and singing jazz, and till I got a reality check from the counselor at Wiley College that said to me, "Well, in the event that that job wouldn't come through, then what would you do?" And got me to thinking, so let's talk about developing some skills as a backup plan. Didn't get to New York and play in the club, but I tell you, her advice was absolutely worthy because it certainly did open up doors for me in terms of being employed.
What did you major in then?
I majored in business and I received an associate degree from Wiley because financial problems at home brought me home. And so I was able to get an associate degree. And I put it on the back burner and it said to myself, whatever and whenever, I will get my degree. I don't know when, but I am going. That's a goal. That's a commitment I'm making to myself. And so when I have 2 children, son and daughter, and when the empty nest happened, I made a decision and I went on the campus of Langston University and finished my last 2 years on campus and did get my degree. That was in 80, just before I went into the legislature. And the interesting thing about that I was in my 50s. And so when I first went to class the very first day on campus, I thought, well, let me just kind of water myself down here and try to look as casual as I can for my age. And I'm going to be here neck to neck with these 17, 18-year-old students. And so when I approached the classroom, and I was coming into the classroom, and some of the students were kind of hanging around the door, standing outside talking, and this one young man said, "Guy, get over, get out of the way for the teacher." And so I laughed about it. I said, "No, I'm one of you. I'm here to be a student along with you," and developed a really great relationship with the young people that I was in class with. And I always have to say, that it was a big thanks to Dr. Holloway, who made it possible for me to stay on campus in one of the, adult apartments there, and then an opportunity to work in the library, which I was always fascinated with the library anyway. So I had an opportunity to work in the library, and it was a great 2 years. And it wasn't about getting the degree for any particular job or to enhance employment where I would be. It was that goal and that commitment that I'd made to myself that somewhere I will get that degree. Sometimes I will do that. I just did not have the discipline to do it as a wife and mother at the time, and work. And so I couldn't split myself between the work and my children. And I felt that when I'm working, then I've got to give them the quality time in the evenings. And so I'm not going to split that. I'm not going to take that time away from them. And so I feel good about that because that was a great time that I had with my kids when they were young.
What do they think about being in the Senate?
Oh, it was a journey for them. And then, of course, my son was, we had to really kind of work with him because when you're in those forums and when I can remember on one of the events, it was pretty hot. It was, I mean, sheer attack. You know, you've got people who are supporting you, special interest people, and it was going on and on and on. And it just seemed like it was my night to get all the blows. And he was there at the forum. And of course, as his mom. And so he just became violently ill. And my husband had to just take him home. And when I got home, and he said, "Why are you even doing that? Why are you letting those people stand up?" And he said, "And you would not." His thing was, "And you weren't fighting back." And I said, "No, you didn't. You missed it because I was fighting back, but I was fighting back in a way that was comfortable for me, because they were throwing, the ugly remarks and so forth. I was not going to do that." And so I think that I did rise above the fray and not allow those guys. And that's what that was the whole thing. We can break her down. I'd heard that over and over and over. We just got to find that spot to make her lose it on in public. Show the people that she's not strong enough to be there.
Mostly the men?
Yes,
Men
yes, mostly men.
Any other gender differences then?
So, and then, of course, back to your question about my son and the daughter. Then they began to understand. And then, as I said to them, and I said, it's not only me that has to be in check. You guys will have to be in check as well. And so you've got to keep that in mind too, that what you're doing in the public, you're being scrutinized as well as I am. And so it becomes a family thing. And I think that's one thing that is very important, is that, having the support of your family and being able to juggle yourself. You're going over and you're there when I first started, we didn't have the time element that we had to be out, so it meant that we may be there through June, or we may be there later until that all changed. And of course, session started at a certain time and ended at a certain time. You could be up with the mic in your hand, and at 5 o'clock on that last Friday in May, it's all over. And so coming home and then putting on the mother hat and the wife hat, and you've got to learn how to balance that time to, and along with that is that then you're 24/7 with your constituents at home who are calling on you and wanting you to come to their events, or might have some concerns that they want to discuss with you, or may need help in resolving a situation. So you wear several hats.
Did you live there then when you were in session?
Yes, I did. In fact, the Senator Roger Randall was pro tem at the time that I went in, and he was very helpful in location of apartments and this type of thing. And he had recommended one where some of the legislators stayed, which was close to the Capitol. And so I stayed in the apartments. Was there Sunday through Thursday, maybe sometimes Friday. But then my husband became a little bit more flexible, and then if rather than come home sometimes, he said, "Let me drive over and let me just spend the weekend in Oklahoma City," and we just try to do some fun things in Oklahoma City. So sometimes that kind of balanced out.
Tell me a little bit about swearing in day, the first one.
That was very, 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 very exciting. All of a sudden, it's almost as if, is this really happening? Is this really real? In fact, before I went over to the Capitol, Judge Charles Owens came to Tulsa right after, I guess, our general election. Once I won the race, he came over, and so we had a ceremony for in Tulsa for, and I thought that was a great idea because all the people who had worked in my campaign and friends and family and close constituents, they were able to come, and we did that in the Mabel B. Little House on Greenwood, which is part of the Greenwood Culture Center complex, right next door here to OSU. And so we had a swearing-in ceremony, and Judge Owens performed that, and that was really special because it was sharing a really great moment with all the people who had worked with you, believed in you, gave up their time to make this thing happen. So that was great. And then, of course, when I was sworn in over in Oklahoma City, then that's kind of like being on the red carpet, sort of. I mean, it's like you're here with all of these people, and then you start looking around and thinking, all these people with all this experience, and what happens to me now? So, but the one thing that I can say in the Senate is that the help of your colleagues is there, and even though you disagree on legislation, things that you want to do, but in terms of walking you through the process, teaching you some of the things that are necessary to get through it, because I think even if you go, even in school, and taking the courses and you know, but when you get there, that it's a whole different thing. It's a whole different thing. But it's the greatest honor I think one can have, that you are one of course, on our floor, 48 here that can serve and make a difference, not only just in your community, but and be a part of historical things for the state of Oklahoma.
Are there any particular ones that stand out in your, as moments, defining moments or whatever for your career, for your time there?
One of the
besides the first one you mentioned about the Oklahoma Higher Learning Access Program, are there other
things that I, one that's, of course, go back sort of to the arts,
Sure.
was that I heard there was a book review. A professor from OU came to Tulsa, and he did a book review about jazz, and he was just absolutely exciting. And while I knew, being from a musical family, and the fact that I knew a lot of these artists, but when he started talking about people like Barney Kessel and Chet Baker and Oscar Pettiford, and the list just could go on and on and on, coming from Oklahoma. Now, some of them that he mentioned I knew because I'd heard these names in my home. My dad had their record collections, that's what they were during that time. And after the lecture, I went up to him and I said, boy, that was just absolutely exciting. I said, that is too bad. I said, we should be able to honor these people. People should know this. And he said, oh, that would never happen. And so I said, well, what if it could happen? And would you be willing to help me if we were able to get something done to recognize, establish a Hall of Fame or something? Or he said, oh, never happened. And I said, well, what if it does? And he said, well, if in fact it happens, yes, I would agree to consult with you and, help in any way that I can. And so I was so excited. And when I went and Senator Bob Cullison was pro tem at that time, and I went into his office, got an appointment to go into his office. And so I said, I want to talk to you about something. And I'm so excited. And you can imagine his desk is full of everybody's reports, and he's looking at budgets and getting ready for, the agenda for this legislative session and how we're going to get through these budget things and all of the necessary things that he needs to take care of. And I'm in here talking to him about establishing a Hall of Fame for the state of Oklahoma. And so, he looked at me and I said, well, right now, we don't have to worry about a home for the Hall of Fame, and we don't have to worry about money. So I said, would you support this? I mean, if I can get legislation passed, would you be supportive? And he said, you're saying no money, no building? And I said, we don't need that at this time. I said, it has a home that, and I've already asked and I found out that it could be in the Greenwood Cultural Center. I said, so we wouldn't have to worry about a building. So he agreed. And of course, that's where that began, was legislation was passed and this is celebrating our 20th year. And so to be able to honor all of and to continue to honor. My thought is that to serve, here again, going back to education, but also to educate our youth, as well as our adults, on our diamond in the rough here in Oklahoma. Because most people thought Chet Baker was out of California. They thought Jay McShann was out of Kansas City, and Fiddler Williams was out of Kansas City. Those two guys, Barney Kessel, those guys were out of Muskogee, Oklahoma. And Chet Baker was Yale, Oklahoma. And so the fact that we could honor and bring the attention to these people who were great artists all over the world, that right here in Oklahoma, we just had a wealth of treasures that should be recognized and honored. So we stayed probably as just a focus group for the first year, not knowing exactly how we were going to, put this in motion. But what I did know, and I kept saying always, that it had to be, foremost focused on education. So everything that we're about, even if they entertain, we want them to come in and conduct master classes into the schools. And so if we get them here to perform, one of the things we ask of them is that, will you go into the schools or a school that we have made arrangements with, adopted, or bring them into the Hall of Fame, and you work with our youth. And so that's where that began, and that was a great moment to be able to get that legislation passed, and then annually to be able to bring in these people who from all over the world and have them honored. And sometimes if we get them to perform as well. So that's where that started.
Well, you do something with the PAGE program too?
Yes. Yes, in fact, with the pages, it was my desire always to go into and recruit. I know some of the legislators said, well, write me a letter and tell me a little bit about yourself, and we'll see, you get to come over and become a page. Well, I wanted to reach out further than that, and so I wanted to get involved with organizations who were working with kids who would not even know anything about the Capitol, who have never made a trip to Oklahoma City, never performed any kind of community service, perhaps. And so I always made it a point every year to make sure that I had uh, uh, a young man and young woman coming out of an environment that would not know anything about Oklahoma City. And I had this guardian angel who was very close to me in the campaign, understood what I was trying to do, and she said, whenever you have those young people coming in as a page, she said, I want to have money there for them to be able to do whatever the other youngsters are doing, through the week, because there's a planned program for them, but they get to go out, shop, go eat, and those kinds of things. She said, I want them to be able to do that without saying, no, we'll just stay at the hotel, because, of course, the Senate took care of hotel and those things, but you were on your own in the evenings for any of the activities that they allowed you to, and of course it was always supervised. So I thought that was a great thing to do, and I can remember that there was a young man out of Bristow. That's where his home was, but he was in a facility here in Tulsa, I guess going through some correctional behavior. And his counselor said, I have a young man that I would love to come and be your page. And he said, we'll have to get, clothes. I said, well, they do have to, they're on the floor. They have to have shirt, tie, suit, jacket, whatever. It doesn't necessarily have to be a suit. When they're on the floor, they do have to have a jacket, suit, jacket, and be dressed in that way. And he said, we'll work that out. And so the young man came, and he thoroughly bright young man. And so I brought him home because he didn't have a way to get back from Oklahoma City. And I said, well, I'll be happy to, as I'm leaving the Capitol on Thursday, I'll be happy to take you home. And I said, and I hope, when I dropped him off, I said, well, I hope you had a good, he said, I did. He said, I really have thought about a lot of things, thought about what I would like to do, what I would like to focus on. And one day I was at the service station getting gas, and the counselor came up and he said, aren't you Senator Horner? And I said, yes. And he said, I don't know if you remember me or not. He said, but I was the one. I said, oh, yes, I never forget a face. And he said, I just want you to know that young man that you allowed to serve as a page for you went on and went off to school, and said, and his thing is that he wanted to be a lawyer. And he said he was so fascinated with the Senate that he said that just changed his whole thing about what he wanted to be, and so he focused in on that. So, and there are stories, that I could go on and on and on, but that was just a vision for me, that not just getting, family kids, friends kids, and that as well, because they deserve to have that experience as well. But I also wanted to make sure that every year that I would reach out. And when I worked with one of the organizations, one of the gentlemen that was a counselor in his organization started out saying, okay, you've got to get prepared, and you're going to get points, so that if you get good stars and all that, then you're going to have an opportunity to go to the Capitol. If you fall by the wayside, you're not going to get to do it. So he instilled in them to start working toward being better students, better people, day by day, to be able to earn that right to get rewarded at the end of any project that they may have been involved with. So, and I go back to the congressman because the fact, and that was one of the things, probably more than legislation for me, was the fact that, particular in my area, in my district, is that many people, and certainly at that time, would never think of calling on their legislator to try to get certain kinds of things resolved, or they're having difficulty getting housing, or other kinds of concerns that they may have. And so that was one of the things that I did take from working with him, because that was something that really appealed to me, and probably that was really the in doing that and going into the political arena, made it much easier for me. I think when I started with the race, was that to be able to educate people in my district on how you go about getting access to getting things done. How to contact different agencies about problems that sometimes it's just a phone call, and one would just never think that I can call and they will actually respond to this. So it was not all about legislation for me. It was also going to reach back out, and I guess I'll go back again to educating adults and youth as well on how to utilize the political process.
That's great. Back up just a little bit and talk about your campaign a little bit more. Did you notice if the bigger obstacles were being race or age, gender, or any of those?
It was, I would say, race and gender, and I will go to. I remember, because of the Senate district that I served, there an area where at that time, and I think its personality of it may have changed some, but it was predominantly white, and I remember when we were getting brochures, and of course I was trying to, as well as my name, I put my face on the brochure, because you might not know me, you might not know, well, I don't know who that is, maybe if they, don't know the name, they see the face, oh, I know who that is. I've seen her at one meeting or another. And I remember this guy who was very supportive of me, in fact, and he was, and I reached out to him because he was a strong political force in that district. And he said, well, I want to give you some advice. And he said, now when you do some of your brochures, you need to leave your picture off. And I said, why? And he said, well, I just think, the fact that, you African American lady, and I just, they just don't need to know that. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, I just don't think that would be good for them to know that, and they may not come out and support an African American. And I said, well, I find that kind of hard to believe, because there was an African American male who was in this seat. He said, yeah, but they probably didn't even know, they didn't know who it was. And so I said, well, they're going to know who this face is, because maybe the problem is they feel like they've never been served. Maybe no one has ever knocked on their door. And I plan to do that. And I'm not going to hide. I'll go back to my mom. I'm not going to hide who I am. And so, and they need to know who I am, because this is important. They need to know that irrespective of my skin color, I'm there to serve this particular district. And so he said, well, you're going to take it. I said, well, that's the chance I'm going to take. And so in that district, and I made it a point, and I said, if you're going to win, you're going to have to outwork me, because I'm going to knock on as many doors as I can. And I remember in that particular district, I went to a home. This gentleman was sitting on the porch, and he was fenced in, and so I was at the gate, and I said, I would like to talk to you. I'm running for the Senate. And he looked up at me and he said, are you a lawyer? And I said, no, I'm not. And he said, well, I don't vote. I don't believe in none of that stuff. People don't do what they say. Oh, he took me all around the horn and he said, and I just don't think a lady has any business being over there. You can't hang with those old guys. That's the good old boys club. You can't do that. And he just kept saying can't. And I said, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you give me an opportunity to try? I said, why don't I leave you some material? And I said, and I tell you what, this promise I'll make to you is that if in fact you ever need me, I want you to call the office. And he said, oh yeah, right. That's what they all say when they're around here trying to hustle your vote. And he went on and on and on. And so I said, but I'm gonna leave the material, right? And he said, well, do what you want, but I don't think you have any business. He just, woman doesn't be over there, blah, and he just kept. And it was a voice, how there are voices that you just won't forget. And so I don't know exactly when, but I remember this phone call. And my assistant said, you have a call from your district, because I made it plain to her too, is that I want to make sure that I'm talking to and returning all calls. I mean, I don't want, them ever feel that I won't return a call. So if I'm in the office, I want to always be accessible to whoever calls me. I wanted that clear up front. I said, because my constituents are very important to me, and I want them to know that I'm here to serve them. They put me here. I'm here to work for them. So when she transferred the call, and I heard this voice, and it just, went back to seeing him on the porch, giving me the third degree about why I shouldn't be doing this. And he said, well, you told me to call you. Well, I have a problem. I don't know if there's anything you can do about it, but I have a problem. And I said, well, I don't know what the outcome will be. I said, but whatever it is, let's talk about it and let me see if it's something that can be done. And it was something that I could do, which was resolved. And he called back and he said, well, you know what? As long as you're running, and he said, as long as I'm in your district, you can always count on me to be a supporter of yours. And he said, and you can always put a sign in my yard when you're running. And so, I used those two things dealing, and of course I had many more dealing with the race, but I think it was more gender. I think it's, and even out of my own district, the fact that it just should be that men should be doing those things. I mean, women are taking over everything. I mean, men just should be there. So, and then I think having gone there, and when you have the wonderful support of people who have gone before you, who have served. And I remember Hannah Atkins calling me and said, when you come over, call to say congratulations. She said, and let's get together, and I'll take you to dinner when you arrive in Oklahoma City on an evening that you're free. And she took me to dinner, and she said, and I just want to share with you some things that you might come up against as a woman in the legislature. And she said, because the men can get together in the evening, they can go and they can play dominoes, or they can talk about over dinner, they can talk about certain kinds of legislation, certain kinds of things that they want to see get passed and this type of thing. She said, but as a woman, she said, you can always do breakfast, and you can always have a breakfast meeting, and you can always have a lunch meeting. And she said, and until you feel your way, until you're comfortable, in fact, if they don't let you in the good old boys club in the evening, she said, you can always schedule those early morning meetings. and get a feel for the kinds of things that may be coming your way. And of course, you've supplied many other kinds of things that you may be confronted with. And don't take things personal. Step outside your box and realize that you are serving in the legislature. It's not, Maxine, the personal thing on your personal views necessarily. You're representing your constituency, and you are representing the state of Oklahoma. And so you've got to listen to everyone, and that's an important factor, an important key is to listen. And, you know, back that you come in, you're a freshman, you don't have to come in and just try to take the world by storm. Listen, take your time, look at things, and just step by step, you'll find your way through the legislative process, because even the things that you campaign on, you may find that you may not be able to get those done your first year, that there's a process in the way this thing works. And so take your time, look, listen, and learn.
Do you think she told the other freshman women that same thing?
She might have, and the fact that Judge Miles LaGrange was already in Oklahoma City, they probably had those, she probably had the opportunity to have those conversations early on, probably even during her campaign, because they were very close as well. And I think she probably knew the judge personally through the years. Vicki had always had aspirations of, I think, of being at some point being to serve in the legislature. So those are the kinds of things, though, that are very, very helpful. And of course, we went through orientation. That process is there for you, but it's always good to be able to have someone who's walked those steps, and to be able to tell you, you know, how to just keep yourself in check, because you do think that, oh God, the worst thing I can do is go in here and try to put this bill before all these people, and then just in the committee process, trying to get it out of committee, and then it doesn't stop there. Then you've got to go and convince 47 people that this is a good thing, and you hope they can support you on this. And then once it leaves there, then you've got to go over and network with the House side to try to get support over there to get your bills passed. And I think it's very helpful to be able to have, which I was fortunate to have, and that was Representative Don Ross was serving in the House and from Tulsa, and so we share a district, a portion of his House district, and then of course there's Representative Darrell Gilbert. So I was in two houses that I shared with Representative Ross and Representative Gilbert. And so it was good to have someone from Tulsa in those positions over there to be able to say, well, I need you. Can you convince, you know, we'll do what we can. So it was good to be able to have that support where they could go and talk to their House members and or even carry a bill for you. That was the other thing, is that you may have a good idea over here, but you've got to also make connection with someone on the House side to be able to carry that bill, your bill, as well. And it works both ways, because they're going to have bills coming from the House that they're going to need Senate authors to carry. So having that support factor, both in the Senate and the House, is very, very important.
Did the women group together a little bit?
Yes, we did. We used to have what we call kind of a fun night, and we kind of called it on Wednesday because many people did go to service. In fact, we would go to, we had gone to Vicky Miles Lagrange's church. And that was good because we had, and she was I just admired her so. It was Senator Helen Cole, who was on the other side of the aisle. She's Republican, and of course, I'm a Democrat, and the majority of us were Democrats, but she was just the greatest person. And we would all get together. And that's the other thing that you learn, that she might stand up and be, adamantly opposed to something that you're doing, and a bill that, or maybe a bill that she can't support. But at the end of the day, is that you could get together and really enjoy one another. And so we did spend at least once a week there in the early days. We did that. And I never will forget Senator Helen Cole, because the first day that I was coming up on the agenda to carry my bill, and I'm doing this, and she walked over and she said, and just kind of put her hand on my shoulder, and she said, "You're going to be fine." She said, "It's okay." I think she could see that I was just like, "Oh God, so I'm next. I think they're getting ready to call on me, and I got to get up here. I just hope I don't make a fool of myself over this bill." And but when she walked over and she said, "You're going to be fine. We all go through it. We've all had that first time." She said, "Once you do that first time, then you become an old hat. It'll get more comfortable." And it was just the fact of doing it correctly. And then when you have someone to come forward like that, it's just gives you another thing of confidence that, okay, I'm okay. And and she gave a wink and went back to her seat. So we really had some good times together.
We were talking a little bit about your time in the let's see, it was socializing with women while we were there. Were there any other obstacles in the House once you got there? I mean, you had some when you were running, but once you got into the Senate, did you have any particular troubles?
Yeah, well, mostly with type of legislation that certainly that I carried. And I think also there's, I can remember quite vividly, one was the Confederate flag, and one was the 1921 race riot. And on the Confederate flag, that was at the time that Helen Arnold was serving, I think, as Secretary of State at the time. And there was a bill that came to the floor that said that that flag should fly over the Capitol. And of course, we, as a Black caucus, we were adamantly opposed to that happening. And so that was debate on the floor that was hot and heated, and it was some of the things that I think would come out in, I guess, the real thing, personalities rather, of individuals. You had to back off in your mind to keep from getting just totally angry. Is that as much as you believe what you believe, they believe that as well. And so don't lose sight of what you're wanting to do here. Because the fact is that this should not happen. And then it's always enlightening when you have your white colleagues who can stand up and debate along with you for something that you feel very passionate about, and can counteract some of the negatives that were coming from some of your other colleagues. And that is something that that you develop because they understand what you're feeling, or they have strong sensitivities about some of these things that they know is degrading, offensive, or not right. And on the race riot, the fact that we wanted to bring this to light is that it was not, and you had the argument, why do we have to bring this up? Why are we doing this? I mean, we're dividing people. No, we're not dividing people. What needs to happen is that this needs to be known. It was an event. It was a horrific event, and it should be known. And it was actually to establish a commission to study, to bring a study about this, and it was amazing to see this just be taken out of context of what the original desire initially was to, and you said, well, it's just like you had the Oklahoma City bombing, I mean, that wasn't pretty, and that wasn't, but it's, there's a memorializing, and why couldn't we do this? You had so many people who had said that they never even heard of it. They didn't even know anything about it, and that was the whole purpose of educating people to something that had happened. And the beauty of it is that the people who survived were relentless in restoring the community. And so that story needed to be told. This was a thing to be proud of, the fact that our people could come back and rebuild homes they lost, businesses they lost. They could rebuild. And we had several of my white colleagues who came on board, and one of the things they said, well, I can support everything, because there was a scholarship piece in the bill, there was economic development in the bill, but the thing that would just tear everyone apart, pretty well, not everyone, but I would say the majority, both the House and the Senate, was reparations. And so the point that I want to make here on that issue is that one learns to compromise, because you say, rather than, well, I can support it. I can support it as long as reparations is not in that bill. But if reparations is in that bill, I just can't support it. I just can't. Well, then you make a decision. Okay, are we just going to lose the bill completely? Are we going to try to do what we said we were trying to do in terms of making this situation known? It's a part of our history. It's not a pretty part of our history, but many things in history is not pretty, but we need to be able to do this. And the other thing was that finally we had survivors who were finally ready to talk about it. For years and years and years, people just would not talk about it. They said, oh, that's just past. We just don't want to deal with that anymore. But the fact, before many of those people left this earth, we could get their voices. We could get them to tell the story, not someone else, historians coming in, imagining what happened. But you could actually hear the actual stories from these survivors, how they left their home, when they left their home, how other members of the white community came in and supported them and got them to safety. So it was more than just the riot itself. It was a whole story of the event, how it happened, how the people bounced back, and and began their businesses and building their homes all over again. And so those were, I think, in my political career there, that the flag and the race riot was two of the probably heated, controversial issues that I was involved with. Then the Confederate flag came back around just before I left, retired from the legislature. And I think the saddest moment for me, I guess, in my political career was the fact that it resurfaced. And from the Black Caucus, I was the only member of my caucus that was opposed to that flag being placed. I think it was to go in the History Center or something. But I was absolutely, the very people who had been adamant against it had now come, and one of the members even authored the bill, carried the bill on the Senate on the Senate floor. Which here again, then you make a decision. Well, I have to stand on what I believe, and so I have to stand up against my colleague, as well as she had to defend her position. But that probably was one of the saddest moments, because we were one of the first states that made sure that that flag was not visible in the state of Oklahoma. And then to come back around and be a state that now flew this flag was just offensive to me. And so that was probably one of the saddest times for me, was the fact that every member of the Black Caucus voted for it, and I was the lonely soldier who stood up against it. So, but that happens.
Well, what was the outcome on the Race Riot Commission?
Well, the Race Riot Commission, that did, the legislation did pass to the first part of the bill was the study. The and people were appointed from both the Speaker of the House and the Pro Tem to serve on that commission. There was also a designee to come from the mayor's office. So we had representation from the state, the city, and the county to serve on that commission. And then based upon the recommendations from the commission, then we would come back with a bill to move forward with the recommendations from the commission. Well, the things that were recommended in the report, one, of course, was reparations. The bill did pass, but without reparations. And of course, out of that grew some disappointment. People who served on the commission that felt like the reparations should have been in that bill. We just couldn't get it passed. And so rather than have nothing, we certainly, the educational component was fine. The economic development portion of it was fine. The reparations was no. And so we moved forward with those components in the bill. And the members of that commission who felt like they still wanted to fight for reparations, then on their own, they established. So I guess a group out of that group, they continue to fight, and still, at this point, still fighting for the reparations for survivors and or their descendants. And the survivors are getting fewer and fewer and fewer. but they have been to Washington, and they have appeared before the Congressional Black Caucus in Washington, D.C., as well as Congresswoman Maxine Waters came to Tulsa in support of the caucus to see if they can get it on the national agenda. So I think it's still being pursued on a national level.
Okay. While we're on that type of subject too, do you recall the day of the murder bombing?
Yes, I do. I do. In fact, the and it's so vivid for me because I was leaving. A role model for me was Thelma Whitlow, who was once upon a time was director of the YWCA in North Tulsa, along with many other functions of the city. But I was on my way from Oklahoma City that morning, coming back to Tulsa for her funeral. So I was not in Oklahoma City when it actually happened. And of course, I have family in North Carolina, and when that news came on, they had no sense of, of where that building was or what was going on. And they were calling, trying to find out, where is she? I mean, is she okay? Or they didn't know that, they had no idea about the Capitol, where it was, if it was at the Capitol. I mean, you know how stories can just fly. But I could not, I could just not believe that. I could not even believe that that was happening in our state. I mean, even when you read about things in other places, and you can say, oh, how terrible. And then there were people that you knew, and you just couldn't imagine that these people were no longer living. You just could not imagine. I mean, that is, gosh, I just think that is just probably the worst feeling one could have, and when and looking at the site of it, you just could not. It's just unbelievable. It was just unbelievable. And as I said, um, the fact that I was on my way out of the city, and when that happened, left out early that morning to get here to attend her service. Otherwise, I would have been right there in the city, when it all happened, because many of the people in the Capitol said they could feel, the impact, of that. So that was just, I think it's like being stunned. You just, this just isn't happening. Am I really dreaming? And so, but from that, certainly to make the site, a memorial, was very fitting for that, and it's just well toured because you see people there all the time. But like I said, I will never forget that day because I could, how you can say, well, what were you doing at the time that happened? And that was what I was in my car on my way, and my family was just going berserk because at that time I didn't have a cell phone, and my husband said, we are going to make sure that because I kept saying, I don't need those things, I don't even need one of those, and we're going to do this, you're going to get it. And in fact, they get on me now because most of the time I leave it somewhere else and don't.
All right, let's get back to, were you the chair of any of the committees that you were on?
Yes. In fact, I was very proud to have served as the first female to serve as the Democratic Caucus chair, and so that was I was appointed by Senator Stratton Taylor, who was pro tem. As you can see, I've served under three pro tem, well, four, because Senator Cal Hobson was there before I left. And then I chaired the Business and Labor Committee. I also was chair, and as chair of the caucus. Let me go back to the Senate caucus, because then I could just wield my power, because I would say, well, here are the good old boys in here. Most of them in here. So, they get out of hand. I'd have to say, well, you have to direct everything through the chair, and let's have some order here. And so, but it was there that, that if we needed to caucus, and so I had to preside over that meeting and try to keep things level. That would could certainly get kind of heated, and certainly we all disagree, and then finally we're wasting time here. Let's come to some agreement so that we all on one accord when we leave out of here as a caucus. And then in serving as chair of the Business and Labor Committee, that was a big committee, and a lot of legislation passed through there. I had a Republican vice chair, and my thought is that most of the committees that I was a member of, rarely did the vice chair get an opportunity to really preside. If you were carrying a bill, if your bill happened to be in that committee, then you would say the vice chair would preside that one moment that you're carrying the bill, and then that was pretty much it. So my thought is that the vice chair should have an opportunity to preside as well. And might have been criticized a little bit, because sometimes Mama said, why would you yield the chair over to the vice chair? I said, because I think that vice chair should have the opportunity to not just sit there and just be there in posture only. And so, and when I said to him, we're just going to do this jointly, and he said, well, I'm totally pleased that you would do this. But I really feel that there are those, and learned along the way that you have different philosophical stands on things. But I think the beauty of serving is to be able to come to what is the best, for our state, and what is the best to get this resolved, and really try to throw out the partisan part of our political being out. And I later in my legislative career, I began to see more of that becoming so partisan that it was just right down the line. Okay, they're going to vote this way, we're going to vote this way. And even on the national scene, I get disappointed when I see this happening. And once upon a time, you used to, there were statesmen that you admired because they could come together and work on bills. And really, sometimes, your things that you're wanting to do in the bill, to have someone else and come and to give another point of view, may actually be a better way to work through this thing, to solve it, resolve it. And so early on in the very beginning, I saw more of this working together than just being totally, we're just voting straight down the party line. That we have the ability to think on what's first of all and foremost best for our state and for our constituents that we serve. And I certainly would like to see more of that even on the state level, city level, because nothing is achieved and accomplished when, well, we're just going to vote this way and then, no one wins. And so I think that was critically important for me to share the power. And I think might have been criticized for it, but that was something that I totally believe, because I don't think one needs to be intimidated by, uh, um, uh, as they say, giving up. Why are you giving up your power? It's your moment to. I said, yes, but the thing of it is, this individual is sitting right next to me. And I know if it were me, I would just want to say, I don't really need to sit here and be vice chair. If all I'm going to do is just vote. And so we had a good relationship, and I think that goes along the way now. What has really happened now at the state level, because now they do have to share those key positions that are in power, where they have pro tem and this type of thing. So hopefully down the way, we will move forward and not be so partisan about getting things done for our state.
Well, as chair, did you have to read a whole lot more then?
As chair and member, and that is ongoing. When one would say, you're taking your homework in the evenings, I mean, the bills, once they're filed, and there's so many, and then when we became on a time limit, you've got to get your bills filed, you've got to hit the road, hit the deck rather, carrying your bills when you're first getting session. And we know we have until the last Friday of May to take care of business. And so every day, and if you're on several committees, then not only are you reading, trying to stay on top of those bills in committee, but you're trying to stay on top of all of the other bills that are in committees on which you do not serve, that's going to come to the floor, that you're going to be have to vote on. And this is where I do say that there is a need for advocates. There is a need for lobbyists, and I know some people think of lobbyists as the dirty word, but there are those that you come to know who are highly respectful. And I think what happens with that is that it brings attention to some things that you may miss in that bill, you would never know, you would never see. And I think that when you gain the confidence in some of these people, then you know that, and they know that they just can't come to you and bring you their own, if it's something that's their special interest that they're really pushing, that you begin to find out, they know who I am, they know what I represent, and that if it's going to be something that's negative, that affects my constituents that I serve, then don't bring that kind of information to me. But on the other hand, it does make you aware of some things that you might miss. Even when you take all that information, take these piles and piles of bills home to read, there might even be things in there you do not understand. And so one cannot say that I understand everything that's in those bills. And when you have some of those bills that are just pages and pages and pages, and I think that's where also staff, and you have these wonderful, talented, bright staff people, when you call on them to be able to say, okay, help me to understand this bill, or what does this mean, or what is this, because they do all the research. I mean, most of them write the bills, even when you come with, this is like even with my OLAP, the bill, is that the staff that worked with me was going to make sure that everything would fit, that it was not anything would be against the Constitution. So, I mean, and to have that kind of expertise, with staff that you have, and then also with advocates who would come. I can remember when there was, I guess it first started with the smoking, where you could smoke and couldn't smoke, or no smoking in restaurants or whatever. And I remember thinking in committee, I was on that committee when the bill was being presented, and I was thinking, I just don't think this is something that we need to determine. I think if people want to smoke, they ought to be able to smoke. I was not a smoker, but I just don't see why we're here discussing what people do in their private, whatever. And so I voted, I was not in support of the bill. Well, I want to tell you, when I got back to my office, I got so many calls and said, we have rights too. And here again, this is where I come back to saying that you have to remove yourself from your personal views and then begin to look at you're representing people who, and it wasn't just people from my district. I mean, it was people, look, we have rights too, and then they come and they present their points of view, the health reasons and why and all of these. So you have to start looking at everything. And so they're saying, we're going to get that bill, it's going to come back up in committee. And we hope we can count on your support for the bill. And here again, like I said, it goes back to listening to the people that you represent. And of course, over the years, it was always, I don't think it was a year that went by that we weren't doing something about smoking, non-smoking, and all those things. And the same was true with, I remember the people who were up there were upset because they didn't want to wear helmets, and the bikers, and then you had the cockfighting bill, and so there are those kinds of things that then you've got to really listen and really see, and not knowing that when people can come to you and you can say, oh, that's just the most terrible thing ever. And then you'll have a group of people that come and say, this is a business. This is a business, and it's right in your district. And then you've got to start wading through all of these things. But these are the kinds of things that will come before you.
Well, describe a typical day then. How early would you get to the Capitol and how late would you stay?
Well, early, because I am an early riser. My time would come 8, because if we were going to start committee meetings, pretty much most of the committee meetings started at 9. Every now and then, if there was some kind of running kind of close to another committee, some might start at 8:30. But I would get there. My time was 8 o'clock, and of course, in the evenings was not a time limit for me. It depends, because once you're out of session, then it gives me an opportunity to return phone calls, or maybe to do some needed work there in the office. And so any day for me could have been anywhere from 8 in the morning until 6 or later in the evening. It would just depend. And sometimes if I was going to go to a reception or something, and usually I tried to make a rule that if it was a reception, particularly with them coming from Tulsa, that those were priorities. Those were the ones that I would attend. Not that the others were not important, but I always wanted to make sure if Tulsans were coming over, I wanted to be able to come and greet them as well. So sometimes I would plan my day if reception started. I said most times I think like 5:30. Then I would just remain at the Capitol where I could go and make an appearance at the receptions before I would go on in for the evening. So most of it was a long day, and then in the very early times of when I first went in the legislature, we could have been there much later because sometimes session could run, and if you had to stay in session, then you could be there. I can remember an occasion where we couldn't come to a consensus on a vote, and we were there around the clock. So that doesn't happen anymore, but I can remember a few times that it did happen. But on an average, I would say, and then sometimes it may have been earlier. If you were going to get an 8 o'clock appointment with someone, then I would be there at 7. But I always wanted to make it a point to be there before the pages, and they usually got there about 8:30, and I always wanted to be there before they would come, because if you have pages there, then they're going to come and they may want to visit with you for a little while in the office, share some of the things that they're doing, or you want to visit with them as well and see how they're doing. And speaking of them again, is that I always made it a point that when I had pages over, that I would take them out to dinner. So I would spend an evening with them, and I always tried to take them to a restaurant that they wouldn't normally go to. But then I finally got kind of smart on that, because they were like, oh, they would have just been happy with a hamburger. but my discussion with them was that, I just would like for you to, food may not be all that good sometimes, maybe you'd rather have a burger, but just wanted to give you the experience of a very nice restaurant.
Well, if a lady or a young woman came up and asked you what your opinion would be or advice would be for her if she was thinking about running politics, what would you have to tell her?
Well, the very first thing that I would say is that if she's married, then make sure that the family is on board. I think that's very important, that you've got the support of your family. And then I would say whatever your passion, and usually I've found that many women who did come to the legislature might have started with something that they didn't like that had happened. It could have been a neglected child, and they may come there as an advocate, and maybe they were not getting anywhere with the legislators that they were talking to. But I would say, and that brings me to this second point, would be passion. The passion for the things that you would like to see happen or changed. And then I would say be relentless in what you're trying to do, and don't give up, even if it kind of looks dismal, that may not get past that year, may not get past the next year, but you continue the fight. And I have found that most women who have come into the legislature, who were there before me, and certainly those who came after me, came with a passion. You could tell that if their thing was education, there were things they wanted to see changed in our public schools, or there were things they wanted to see changed in higher education, or there were health issues, or there were criminal justice issues. But those would be the things that I would say that family support, strong passion for what you believe in, and learning how to uh, network with your colleagues. And I would say the other thing that is very important, and that your word is golden. And when you make a commitment um, to your colleagues, um, I would say don't make it if you can't keep it, because if in fact you get up and you think, well, I'm carrying this bill, and I know I got 6 votes in here because I've talked to all of them, and they said they're on board with me. I know this is going to be a close call. It may be something like a 5 to 6 vote, and I may get the other one, but I know I know I've got enough to get it out of committee, and then that person reneges on you, and something happened, they changed their mind, or someone was able to change their mind, but never let that happen, because you shouldn't go back on your word. If you're unsure, so let me think about it. Let me do a little research. Let me see if it's going to not fit well in my district. Let me call a few people in my district, and that is also staying close to your constituency and making sure that you are representing their views, and you're trying to the things you said I'm coming here to do, try to carry them out. And I also say have an agenda, and just kind of do a little check mark and just say, well, I was able to get this done, I was able to get this done, I was able to get this done. And then it may be time to fold and let someone else step in.
Speaking of that, then, do you have any final thoughts when you were leaving office? Then you turned out, so in your last session, or as you were packing that one out the door?
I was absolutely ready to leave. It was absolutely had been, knowing that your year was coming, and I began to feel that very last year in session, in all honesty, and I was trying to think what else, even if I were here, what else can I do, would I do? And I said, well, actually, I feel pretty good about this because I've done what I set out to do. We were able to, and when I say we, I always go back to my colleague, Representative Don Ross. We were able to get the cultural center expanded in our community. We had the Oklahoma Jazz Hall of Fame that we were able to do. We were able to bring attention to the 1921 race riot. We were able to see some changes in economic development through legislation, through getting monies back to our community. So I guess I could say, well done, good servant. We've served well and tried to represent our constituency in their best interests.
Well, my final question, unless you have something else you want to add, is when history is written about you, what would you like for it to say?
I think about that sometimes, and I think that I would say probably my strengths, my unconditional love for my family, and my loyalty to my friends. I think those were the things that I would like for one to remember. And I go back on the strengths because when I had this artist by the name of Joe Kinney call me and say that he wanted to do a bust of me. And I did not know Mr. Kinney. And so he when I met him, he said, I have followed your career, and I would love to do this bust and donate it to the Jazz Hall of Fame. And he said, I think some of the things that you've done have just been wonderful. And he said, and I just admire your character and your strengths. And so when he asked me for photographs, and he said, and I will do younger photographs. I will do you as a younger person. And I said, no, I want you to do me. I've earned every wrinkle, every frown, whatever. And so he said, well, my goal is to, he said, I was struck by the fact when you shook my hand when we first met, and I had not met you. He said, but when you shook my hand and you looked into my face, he said, I saw your strength. And he said, and that's what I want to capture in this bust, is your strength. And I think that that goes well because a person coming from segregated environment, being able to move through the system in spite of obstacles and race, that accessibilities that were denied but moved forward, that having the strength to move forward with that and not become negative and stay a positive person and staying focused. And I think the strength to keep my eye on the prize.
Well, I'm impressed. It's been a pleasure hearing your story today, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's been my pleasure to be here.